Okay, good evening and welcome. My name is Amanda Jennings and I write dark psychological thrillers and suspense, and my fifth book, The Storm, is about to be published. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the New Blood panel for what was supposed to be the inaugural Lime Crime Festival, but sadly, like so many other literary festivals, has fallen foul to what is blazing around us. Thankfully, technology has come to the rescue and I'm able to meet with these three brilliant debut novelists to talk about their work tonight: Will Shindler, Stephanie Wrobel, and Morgan-Bentley. So I'm going to introduce each of them. Will Shindler is the author of The Burning Men. Will has been a broadcast journalist for BBC for over 25 years, spending a decade working in television drama as a script writer on shows such as Born and Bred, Doctors and The Bill. He currently combines reading the news on BBC Radio London with writing and has previously worked as a television presenter for HTV and a sports reporter for BBC 5 Live, and was, that makes me very jealous, stadium presenter for London Olympics. Very jealous. The Sunday Express called The Burning Men an unmissable debut. Stephanie Wrobel is the author of The Recovery of Rose Gold. She was born and raised in Chicago and moved to London in 2014. She worked as a copywriter and associate creative director for an advertising company in Chicago. But when dreams of being a writer began to take hold, she moved to Boston to study an MFA in creative writing. The Recovery of Rose Gold has been written as her thesis, and she returned to London and now writes full-time. Lee Child described Rose Gold as sensationally good and told us that Stephanie is one to watch. Robin Morgan-Bentley is the author of The Wreckage. After graduating from Cambridge with a first-class degree in modern medieval languages, Robin went to work for Google. Since 2014, he's been the senior editorial manager at Audible, as well as being responsible for promoting Audible titles. He also runs their podcast, Audible Sessions. The Wreckage was one of the Times' best new crime fiction picks, and they called it a thrilling, creepy climax with a double whammy twist. So thank you all. I'm extremely delighted to have you all, incredibly impressive, and it makes me feel a little bit unworthy sitting talking to you all, but welcome. So I thought before we cracked on with some questions, I'd get each of you to introduce your books for us. I'm going to go in order of my screen. So on my screen, I have Will first. So if you could talk about The Burning Men.
The Burning Men is a story about a group of firemen who are called out to a major blaze at a large construction site in central London. They go into the building, they find a man unconscious in the burning building. They find a large amount of money next to the unconscious man, and they have to make a decision in the moment. Do they save the man or do they take the money? I'm probably not spoiling it for people when I say they may not do probably, the right thing in that situation, and bad things start to happen.
Right.
That's my book.
and Stephanie.
Yeah, so The Recovery of Rose Gold is about a mother and daughter named Patty and Rose Gold Watts, and it starts with Patty getting out of prison after serving 5 years for poisoning her daughter. And so she gets out and she has nowhere to go, and she begs her now adult daughter, Rose Gold, to take her in. And to the shock of everyone in town, Rose Gold says yes, but the question is why, and things kind of unfold from there.
Amazing. And Robin.
The Wreckage is about a guy called Ben, who is a guy on his way to work one morning on the motorway when another man jumps out in front of his car in an attempt to end his own life. Ben takes this pretty badly, takes a lot of guilt and responsibility on, and goes about forming a friendship with the widow of the man that he's run over.
So I think this is the thing I love about crime panels the most, is that you get to hear the stories, and they're all really gruesome and grim and interesting. I'm not sure what I'd do if I ever did a romance panel. I'm like, oh, okay, but who dies? So I'm going to start with Stephanie. Your book explores Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and I wondered how you came about using this illness as the inspiration for The Recovery of Rose Gold.
I actually first found out about Munchausen from my best friend, who's an elementary school psychologist back in the US. And she has experience with it through her work, not to the degree that I do, or that this book is, thank God. But she told me about it, and I was really intrigued and just disgusted and kind of heartbroken all at the same time. So I started doing my own research, and I was really shocked to find that perpetrators are typically women and often mothers. And so, you know, we think of the mother-child bond as sacred, but it's not in these cases. And I just thought that would be a really fertile ground to explore, like get in that character's head.
Yeah. I mean, it would be fascinating. Did you with your research, did you find yourself sort of being drawn into some of the stories sort of in a personal level? I mean, you said that you were affected by it, you know, that it obviously was horrifying. Did you find it difficult to research?
Yes, I think the research was actually harder than the writing, because once you were doing the writing, it was, you know, you're in the mindset of your character. And so, for example, the mother Patty, a lot of these women or perpetrators in general are so in denial that I just kind of felt like that's what I had to do for the character, just kind of like set aside all of the terrible things that she's done or been accused of, and just, you know, it's not so dissimilar to what we do as humans, which is like highlight the best parts of ourselves and kind of shove the other stuff under the rug, but obviously drawn to the extreme.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, the research is tough, of course, like nobody wants to read about innocent children being hurt, but, you know, I was really gathering the specifics of like what kind of illnesses are typically faked and how do they fake it? How do they pull it off? What are the backgrounds of these people? Like building a profile of both perpetrator and survivor. So that was more of the stuff that I was looking for.
Yeah. And Will, I was sort of doing a little bit of reading around what people were saying about the Burning Men, and lots of people were complimenting you on your ability to sort of create visual scenes and scenarios. And obviously I was wondering how much of your sort of previous life, your experience as a script writer in some of these amazing TV shows that we've all grown up with, how do you think that was very obviously beneficial, but how do you think that has affected your fiction writing?
I find it interesting. I mean, obviously I didn't consciously, I wasn't thinking, I'm going to write this like a script, but I certainly, the way that I plot is, what I found quite interesting plotting a novel as opposed to a screenplay was how similar the process was. And I think I probably plotted, in hindsight, The Burning Men like it was a screenplay. I didn't write it, I obviously wrote it as a novel, but I think maybe in terms of just thinking in terms of picture when I was writing and thinking of those kind of set piece moments that you would get on screen. In hindsight, as I'm talking about it, I'm not sure it was a particularly sensible thing to do, because I don't think the two things necessarily translate. But I think if it's helped people visualize it and it's brought an extra layer of pace and drama to the book, then it's all good.
And actually, that's quite interesting where you say it wasn't necessarily, as you're talking about, it wasn't necessarily a good thing. Was that, so do you think there are probably some downsides of it? Do you think in some way that wealth of experience that you have in script writing has somehow sort of, I don't know, shaped your fiction writing, but in a negative way?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. I think certainly with the second book, I'm being very much aware that I rely perhaps a little too much on dialogue, which certainly comes from writing screenplays, where you have to be incredibly economical about how much information. And I think you always, especially as a new novelist, you're very conscious of your prose and how you can improve it, and I think you're constantly looking at it. And I think dialogue is perhaps something you use as a crutch when you're a little bit unsure of yourself. And I think that's something I hope with each book and with greater experience that I'm developing a little. I'm just sort of leaning less on dialogue as a way to get me through.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I shouldn't really ask this, like asking which is your favourite child, but script writing or fiction writing?
Ooh, do you know what I think I found very, very, very interesting was that it's such a similar experience. I wasn't expecting that. I thought it would be a very different thing, but it is a very similar experience. I think that probably the most fundamental difference is, as a friend of mine said, with great wisdom, there's more words in a book, and it takes a lot longer to write a book than it does to write a screenplay. But I did find the experience of writing the two extraordinarily similar. I wasn't expecting it either.
Nice. And Robin, I'm going to got another quote. So Rosamund Lupton said of Ben, the male main character with insecurity and vulnerability. I've never met anybody like him in a thriller before. So I wanted to ask you what led you to create Ben. Did Ben come first, or did he come as a product of the story?
I think Ben came first. I think it really started, the whole book started with Ben, and then Alice, who's the other main protagonist, developed from after that. I've read a lot of psychological thrillers over the years, as I'm sure we all have, and it struck me that in a lot of them, the protagonists who are the victims or having a hard time are women. And as a man myself who's lived with anxiety and depression for 20 years, I wanted to see that side of being a man reflected in a psychological thriller. So I hope what you have with Ben is a vulnerable male protagonist who in many ways is dominated by a more feisty female character.
Okay, and in terms of how you, because your book obviously in its nature is dealing with the emotion, the emotional side of character quite a lot. Was it? Would you call yourself more of a character-driven writer or a plot? Are you a plotter? Did you plot carefully, or did you take your cues from your characters?
So it's interesting. So with the Wreckage, it was very much character-driven. I had the kind of beginning, middle and end in mind, and then in between that I kind of created scenes and things to get me to those key points. I'm sort of knee deep in writing my second book at the moment, and it is actually much more plot driven. More stuff happens, which has just happened organically. So I'm finding it a very different experience actually writing the second book to writing the first.
And will you sort of go back to try and keep that emotional? Will you sort of write it with the idea that it is plot driven, or will you go back as you rewrite and sort of turn up the dialogue?
Yeah, I think still in my second book there are two, a man and a woman again, who are unusual people, or initially usual people found in an unusual circumstance. So I think they're still complicated characters, but more stuff happens.
So changing the subject a little bit, so actually going back in a way, it's definitely talking, like I was talking to Will about our previous lives and how they might reflect into fiction. You're obviously an advertising copywriter. Your very nature is to make everything very snappy, and presumably writing into 90,000 words is a very different thing. Do you think, how do you think your skill set as a copywriter influenced your fiction?
From a craft perspective, I think advertising really teaches you the art of concision. If you're used to writing billboards, you really it starts to become more second nature, just getting rid of extraneous words. I think from a career perspective, you develop a pretty thick skin in advertising. I always tell the story, just like my creative directors and bosses in advertising, like if they didn't, you'd hand in 5 or 6 TV scripts, whatever it is, and they would just write slashes across the ones they didn't like, and it was like, next, bring me more, and you learn to like not take that personally. It's just like, that's not what was being looked for. So in comparison, coming into publishing, like I feel like I'm being handled with like kid gloves. Like it's like the editors are just like, so yeah, they're just like, this is your thing. And also just having so much creative power, to be honest. Like I didn't anticipate. I think I thought the feedback was going to be more prescriptive than it is, but I personally found they're like, well, we trust you, like, you know what to do. And I was like, do I?
The edit notes that say, you just need to sort of, do more with the character in the first half. You're like, that's 40,000 words. What does that mean? But that's quite interesting, because I wasn't, would have come to this possibly later on, but actually you sort of slightly brought up how, so this is sort of to go to all of you actually, that you've brought up how it feels as a debut novelist. I remember it very, very clearly, how you've written this book and you send it out there, it's been published, it's all exciting, and then you suddenly are sort of hit with the onslaught of reader reactions and reviews, and so, but obviously you sound like you're a little bit more prepared for that than maybe someone of a sensitive nature like myself.
I don't know about that, because I don't know, like advertising is different because you're creating something that people inherently fast forward through. Like nobody wants to actually watch it or read it or whatever. So you're just kind of, you know, nobody's like, ooh, that commercial. So I think I've noticed over the few months since it's been out that I've gotten better at just not reading. Like I don't read Amazon or Goodreads reviews, and just I even on social media, just like if I get tagged and stuff, then I read it. And you just hope that readers don't tag you in negative reviews, which has been okay so far. But yeah, but I don't know. It's just kind of I think the more used to it you get, at least for me, like the less it like ruins my whole day if there's a bad one. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like you get enough good ones that you're like, okay, like this just isn't for everyone, but it doesn't mean like I'm a crap writer or something.
Yeah, and
I've had a really similar experience to that. At the start, I found it really hard, either really amazing or really terrible. Like if there was a good review, oh my God, I love my life. If there's a not so good review, I'm like, why does everyone hate my book? And it's just the kind of the way that I think I tend to catastrophize quite a lot. But then I think hopefully you kind of learn that actually any book, some people are going to love it and some people are not going to love it. And I actually think that's particularly true of crime fiction. When it comes to things like twists or particular plot points. For some people, something might be too far-fetched, or actually, you know what, I don't buy that twist. And then other people think, oh my God, that's the best twist ever. I never saw that coming. It's a really personal thing, and you're never going to please everyone. So I feel better about it all now.
I think that's a really important point, and I think especially because I know Will has got a police procedural, but I think, you know, yours is quite your theme is guilt, isn't it? And behind that, so we're all dealing with sort of psychological issues, and I think the amount of times, you know, sort of 4 or 5 books in that you sort of read, you know, well, I wouldn't have done that, or, you know, that's not how I would have acted, or those people aren't really, and actually then you get some people saying, gosh, that was so real, and you're exactly right, Robin, those you can't appeal to everybody's you know sense of the same really. But and Will, do you know soak up your reviews overnight, or
I think my take on it was that it's really useful as a kind of broad thermometer of how the book's going down, and if the overriding if there's an overriding view, it gives you a good sense of how it's landed. I mean, I obviously, if somebody's given me 1 star and I can see the opening sentence is not promising, I don't open that up and go in there. But you know, I've been lucky that the majority of the views have been very generous and very kind, and I think that for a first book is really helped me, because in terms of future books, it's a slightly softer landing if they're not as successful, for example, because I've had that experience with The Burning Men. But I take the view, you put something out there, you know, as Robin said, that you're not going to please everybody. There are going to be people who think you've written the worst thing that they've ever wasted a few weeks of their lives on. But you know, like I say, if you're getting a general sense that people have enjoyed it and liked it, that's enough, really.
And actually, you mentioning your second books, I was going to ask Robin a question next, but I'm going to jump to my next question to you, because it relates to you having written the first in a series. So I don't write series myself. I sort of feel, you know, I put my characters to bed, they live with me for a year and a half, and then they're gone. But I was interested really with people who write series, sort of what your views of a story arc or character arc. So you've got D.I., Alex Finn, and D.C. Maddie Coulson. Is that right?
That's
yeah.
Correct, yeah.
And so have you got a very clear idea of how their character arcs will stretch for the whole series?
I think that's the really interesting thing. I think as somebody once said to me a long time ago, with developing characters over a series, it's the art of running on the spot, of giving the impression of movement, but actually you don't want to change characters so much that they become unrecognizable. And I think one of the interesting things with the second book was that the character of Finn, for people who've read the book will know he's bereaved going into the book, and is suffering from his bereavement throughout that book. In the second book, it wasn't that I had him singing and dancing, but he had moved on a bit too quickly in my first draft, and my editor pulled me back. And it's just quite an interesting exercise how we are layering that grief as we go through and evolving it. I mean, one question actually I have for both Stephanie and Robin, because I'm very, very curious. I found writing a second book absolutely terrifying. It was awful. I thought I'd be boosted after the first book. I thought I've written this book, it's gone out there, it's had some good review, and then I was sort of curling up in a fetal position on my sofa during the second book, and both my agent and my publisher were very kind. Said, "Look, this is quite a common thing with second books." We got there in the end, and I'm very pleased with it. But I'm just curious if Robin, Stephanie, you had a similar experience. No, probably.
Well, I'm still knee deep in mine, so that gives you an idea. I'm still working on it. I found it hard as well. I think stuff in life has been for everyone a bit strange over the last few months with lockdown and situations changing, and I also became a dad. So lots of change in my personal life, and then also the second novel, which I kind of conceptualized and pitched a couple of years ago now, is all about something terrible that happens to a family. So it's all been like quite close to home in terms of the setup. So it's been quite an emotional, interesting journey for me writing the second book. But I think because of that, some of it's really good. I hope at least some of it's really good. Yeah.
I found the second book much harder to write than the first. I'm not sure if it's because it's a more complicated setup, like there's 3 POV characters and 3 timelines, whereas the first one was only 2. But I just and I also think it's weird because I'm used to working to deadlines, but there's something kind of stressful because it's such a big project that it's like, oh, I have a whole year or whatever to do this. But you're like, to be able to chart it out and be like, well, when do I need to reach these different milestones? Like, I'm just very type A, so the thought of reaching that deadline and being like, I'm not ready is just really stressful. So I thought it's been harder than I thought it would be, to be honest. I have heard of this second book is the hardest book thing with novelists, and I was like, not for me, I'm ahead of the game, whatever. And no, we're still knee deep in it. So I don't know.
I think it's also really interesting for lots of people as well. We're sort of squeezing, those first books you sort of squeeze in around your day job. You don't know, you're just writing it just on the off chance. You don't really have any concept of it being published and going out there. And then suddenly with the second book, you've got people waiting for you. You've got people who are going to read it. You've got faces for your editor and your agent and publicist, and that a little bit more about it, and I think the whole thing becomes quite you feel like you're wearing shackles a little bit. I'd like to say it gets easier by book 5. I'm now writing book 6, and but I'm going to blame do what Robin said. I'm going to blame the external environment for this one. So Robin, we're still talking about jobs, because you've also got a fascinating job when it comes to being a writer. So working at Audible for the years that you have, you've obviously, I imagine we're talking countless books that you've been responsible for helping bring to audio. Was it, and actually this is a very minor side point, but I saw that one of your narrators was Amelia Fox, so obviously a very well-known actress, an incredibly talented actress. So I wanted to ask you if you found it strange being on the other side of the camera, so to speak.
Yeah, it was definitely strange. I had lots of distance from my own book, so I obviously didn't produce it myself, and I had some, I was consulted lots by the publisher, which was really nice, and I had some very particular types of voices in mind, but I was able to. I literally just, there are 3 different narrators: Amelia Fox, Jack Hawkins, and Cobner Holbrook-Smith. And I just went to the studio for half an hour on each of their days to listen in. Yeah, and it was weird. I think it's as weird as any author listening to their words being read out. I don't know if the others also got to spend some time in the studio, but it's like, for me, it felt like a real stage in the book becoming a real thing. Like that Amelia Fox is over there reading these words that I've written. That's a bit embarrassing. I was like, biting my nails and quite, it was overwhelming. But yeah, it was fun, a good day.
It's quite exposing, isn't it? I think,
yeah.
I feel like if I'm ever going to do a reading, I'll pick up my book. This has been out for, could be a number of months, maybe even up to a year. And I will always take a pen to it. And before that reading, 10 minutes before, and make edits. So I never read what's on Because I think I'm not a planner, so I'm probably the opposite to Stephanie. So I don't plan. So I sit down with a vague idea and a very misty cast of characters that will start making you come out in a sort of panic scene. But and then write. So I think I'm consistently editing. So I suppose, like, we know, you know, you're obviously, to what extent do you plan? Would you plan a book? When you say that you're type A, you sort of, is everything there before you write and then do you do any editing, or is it all very much in the edit?
I think that I've noticed that I plan to make myself panic less, because I'll have, you know, what I typically like to do is start macro, and then I'll eventually have a sentence summary of what's going to happen in each chapter, and then I feel comfortable to start writing. A lot of that changes. Like, I have rewritten the second book's draft a few times now, and like very significant things change, like the entire ending and what happens and the twists and all of that. So, but I think for me, it's just less daunting to write 90,000 words when I have some sort of little roadmap. I think for me to like sit down and be like, what's going to happen today? I would just be like crippled with anxiety. You know, it's already like, which specific words do I pick, but to also have to think like what's going to happen, or I think that would just, for me, that would be overwhelming.
Yeah. And so Robin, we got slightly cut off by my tangent, went off on a tangent there, but in terms, so going back to you with your planning, so are you the same as Stephanie, your planner, or are you, as Stephen King would call it, a pantser by the seat of our pants?
I think I'm somewhere in between the two. I think I've done a bit more planning this time because the plot is a bit more complicated, and because there's more characters and more timelines to negotiate. But I am kind of, it's funny, Steph, you say like the idea of sitting down and just being like, what am I going to write today? Like, I did that yesterday. That was like, okay, I need another scene that's vaguely about this. What's it going to be? And for me, there's like a lot of joy in that kind of, I'm just going to see where the day takes me. That's, I think, one of the joys I'm finding about being a writer.
And I actually, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I have been thinking, because it's like been so rigid with the first two books, I'm like, maybe in the third I'll just try it that way and just see what happens.
Yeah, you'll try it and then you'll go, no, I need my plan. Like,
probably.
I did try and plan once, and it was, I just got myself into such knots that I thought I'm never going to be able to do this. But I am slightly jealous of people who plan. So, again, Robin, going back to Audible, at what stage when you were working, you know, being surrounded and sort of immersed in books and authors and the whole business, did you decide that you wanted to write? Have you always wanted to be a writer?
No, I mean, I've always liked writing. I've always been like someone that liked making up stories. I can remember as a kid at primary school, we were doing like these radio plays, and I can remember I must have been about 7 or 8, and I wrote a radio play called The Imposter Queen, about a little boy that dressed up as the Queen of England and was like riding around on a royal carriage. So I've always like had this kind of I've had an imagination, basically. But yeah, I was meeting lots of authors, lots of crime authors, lots of different narrators and different people in the writing community while I was working at Audible. I had a particular idea because of an anecdote that I heard from a friend, and I thought, you know, why don't I just let me try and write this first chapter and see what happens, and it went from there. It makes writing a second book really daunting, I think, when you haven't always dreamed of it, because then suddenly, I mean, Steph, well, you probably had the same experience, but it was like I went with my first book and then immediately it was like, okay, what's your other idea? What's the second? I need a second idea. I need a second pitch. And it's, you know, it's like, I don't know. I had this one idea, leave me alone, but I understand. Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
Were you quite, when you were writing your book, obviously around a full-time job, were you quite disciplined about when you wrote? Did you write every day? How did you approach the writing of it?
I was very disciplined at the weekend, particularly on a Sunday. I'd get up really early and bash through as many words as I could on a Sunday. I find it really hard to juggle during the week. I kind of need to separate work and writing in my brain for them both to work, if you know what I mean. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge I think a lot of writers have with their first book and afterwards.
Well, I was going to direct the same question to Will, actually, because how did you come from where you were to producing your first book?
I found actually, I'm fortunate with my job that my hours really help. I work midday till 7 p.m. every day, which is fab. I mean, I'm at my best between about 9 and 11 in the morning, and that's when I kind of get most of my work done, and then I'm able to go to work. And like Robin, I can just separate, and then by the time I kind of like to go back and polish before the end of the day. And then you can go into the next day sort of confident about moving into the next section of the book. So I kind of I have to say like Stephanie, I'm a huge planner. I mean, I cannot even begin to envisage doing it without lots of documentation, which in no way is a comfort blanket, obviously. But I have to plan. So that actually helps as well with just managing my time. I would actually, one thing I would also say that I did find a challenge. You asked me about writing a series, but I think one of the things with writing a series was that you're writing the one you're in, you're doing edits on the one that's just come before, and you've really got to be thinking about the one that's coming next. And managing those three things together, I think is possibly the most challenging thing I've found with it all.
Yeah, and that obviously comes with practice, she says. So going on to sort of general questions, unless Stephanie, actually because you've got a slightly different route, haven't you? Because obviously you did your book through a creative writing course, and was that something that you, looking back on it, obviously you've got your book written and it's been published and it's done very well. So is that presumably that's something that you would value as a route through into writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think have the, it was a privilege to be able to take 2 years off, and my husband supported us during that time. So that was fantastic to be able to have a single-minded focus. I mean, I was doing freelance work here and there, but it wasn't like a full-time job. But yeah, going into that program, I knew like my number one goal was come out of this with a finished novel. So I always knew that was going to be the period when I didn't have the idea at the time. I just was like, all right, time to write a novel. An idea will come along at some point.
Amazing. So actually your writing for your second book is a completely different guise to your previous book, because presumably you're writing full time now, so you're writing from home. Do you write at home, or are you well, not out and about now, but do you generally write at home?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, pre-COVID, once in a while, if I'm really having a few days in a row where I can't focus, I'll go to the library or something, but I actually prefer to write at home because I like it to be as silent as possible. All my food is like right there, it's just like the internet works. There's no interruptions, theoretically. It's a little harder now with my husband and I both working from home at the same time, but we make do.
Yeah, that's definitely something I think as writers I found quite hard during lockdown, is that the kids I've got 3 children, so they would all leave at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd have this quiet space when I'd walk my dog, and I'd load the dishwasher, and I would have writing. Then at 4:30 everyone would come back in and the house would be alive again. And sort of now I've got, we had my daughter's boyfriend living with us for lockdown as well, so we had 6 of us here, so it was really difficult. And have you found all of you, I mean, Will, you're still working because you are, is it a key, are you an essential worker?
To my own surprise, yeah, no. As a journalist, I got the email quite early that I was a designated key worker. So actually, the shape of my week hasn't enormously changed. Just writing around the day job, but and I think that may have helped actually during this rather bizarre period. I did self-isolate for 14 days back in March, and that was an interesting one in terms of I thought it would be terribly useful, and I wasn't that ill, but I thought I would be able to use the time, and I didn't get much done, but it was that was at the peak of things, and it was just a very odd time, but it's definitely helped to be having a pattern that is familiar to me.
Yeah, and how's lockdown? I mean, because you've got the double whammy, Robin. You've got lockdown and a new baby. Congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah.
So you've got you're full on distractions.
So look, from a being a new parent perspective, it's been a really positive thing because we've 3 of us been at home in our little cocoon. I think had it not been for lockdown, I wouldn't have been in the house as much. So that's been really good. Yeah, writing's been hard. You feel a lot of guilt, I think, knowing that your baby and your partner are in the next room and you're in this room making up a story. So I was like, I'm still feeling very torn. between where I want to be and what I want to be doing, and having different responsibilities. But they're both great problems to have. So,
and have you been? Are you sort of? How are you working with Audible as well? Is that still on at the moment? Is that you still going? You're not going into the office, are you?
No, not going into the office. I'm working to allow a bit more time for writing. I'm working a sort of a reduced week at Audible, so I've got I sort of split my week now between writing and doing work for Audible, and work-wise. But it's all at home. I'm not going on the tube anytime soon.
So a few general questions now. I thought we could talk about crime writing, and obviously, as I said at the beginning, you all write deliciously dark books, which is my jam. So that's cool. But do you think you were start with Robin? Do you think you were destined to be a dark writer, or do you think that's something you chose because the plot came?
Everything I read and watch is dark. Steph, your book is like perfect for me. It's it's so dark. The two characters are just so messed up. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for in a book. And I think you tend to I think write what you like to read yourself. So I don't think you're ever gonna see me write a book about a beautiful love affair that ends in something beautiful. I think I find that a bit of a challenge.
And the same question to you, Will.
Yeah, no, completely with Robin. I can't. The idea of writing a romantic comedy is, it would, somebody would have to die somewhere in it. I can't quite imagine it just being an easy, soft read. No, look, I grew up. My favourite show of all time was Cracker. When I was, for people who haven't seen it, I Google it, look it up. It's some of the best crime writing I've ever seen. Jimmy McGovern, I think, is just a fantastic writer, hugely influential on me. And I just think it's a fantastic prism onto the world, crime writing. I think it's a great way of telling stories about 21st century England or wherever you are. But it's a great prism, particularly now when things seem to be changing almost by the month. The world feels different. It's I think crime or psychological thrillers are a brilliant way of exploring it.
Yeah, and Stephanie, as obviously we read crime as well as write crime. So, as you as a reader, but also maybe the wider public, why do you think readers are drawn to crime fiction?
I mean, I think that when you live a pretty normal life, there's something really enticing about seeing things that have really gone wrong or are very different from your own experience. I mean, I have to write fiction because I've been very blessed to have the most boring vanilla like upbringing that there has been. So it's an opportunity as a writer to get into somebody else's head and into these kind of sordid situations, but then you can easily pull yourself out of it and go to bed at night. And I think that's the same for readers and viewers. Is just this, I mean, it's any fiction really, like you just want to be transported. And the question is, where do you want to be transported to? For some people, it's a love story. For some, I think crime also offers this sort of puzzle. But if, like me, you hate actual puzzles, it's like a puzzle I enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think we always talk about like the fact that you could sort of, experience the lives of people going through these grim situations, but from the safety of your reading nook with a cup of tea. It's quite nice. So what are you guys working on at the moment? What would people be looking forward to next? You're obviously halfway. You finished your second in your series, Will, and Robin, you're halfway through a first draft, or are you on your edit at the moment?
I'm a bit further than halfway through. I'm towards the end of the first draft. Thankfully, finally. So it's another psychological thriller. I think what I'm interested in is the starting points that are very ordinary that everyone can relate to, and then something going pretty wild. So in this case, it's a couple who are about to have a baby, and they check into a very remote B&B, a very remote guest house in Cumbria, in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know if you guys have had the same experience. Sometimes when you check into a very, very small guest house, it can be a bit too small, and sometimes the owners can be a little bit strange, and you start thinking, whose house am I staying in? So that's what this book explores.
It's a really nice and
sounds great.
Yeah, definitely. And Stephanie, where are you at with your next book? Have you got a taste of it?
Sure, I am in the third draft of it, so hopefully we're getting in the right direction. But no, not really edits yet. Still pretty has been pretty big picture. I'm hoping that we're going to edits after this, but we'll see. I just turned it in this week. So, but yeah, it's a book about 3 women, and one woman goes to an island in Maine to try to bring her sister home from this self-improvement program that is exhibiting some cult-like tendencies. So it's written from the leader's view, the member's view, and the member's sister.
Oh, that's right. I'm writing a book set on a commune with a cult-like figure at the moment, but back in the 2000s. And it's interesting. I started working on it before the pandemic, and again, this is another question I was going to ask you. But so, but have you allowed the pandemic and lockdown to have you sort of readjusted anything? Are you referencing it in your books? Will, it's your turn. I'd love to hear from you. But is that, are you referencing it at all, or are you not? Are you ignoring it for the time being?
It's interesting just the way it's fallen. I'm writing book 3 now, which is out in February 2022, which is trying to pitch ahead to it. So I'm working on the assumption that the economy will be in a bad way, and that's going to affect the characters, that people will have lost jobs. I've written it. I am writing the first draft, working on the assumption that social distancing may or may not be a thing. Hopefully, I've written it in such a way that if it is a thing, then it can still work. But you're very aware of it. I think it's very, very, very difficult now not to embrace everything that has happened and bring it into the books. It already, my second book feels like a period drama, really. It just feels like another world.
I panicked when I was writing mine in March when we went into lockdown, and I decided to do this. It was set in February 2021, and I decided just to change it to 2019 because my head felt like it was going to explode. And then about a month ago, I suddenly thought, no, I can probably do this. It was okay. So I just started dropping in references, but it felt, because you didn't know what the shape was, did you? It was sort of, you had no idea how long lockdown was going to last, what the pandemic was going to be like. But I do think you're right. I think books will start to just reference it. Have you done the same, Robin and Stephanie?
I have not. I've started referencing it towards the end of the book, so that it feels familiar, but not too much, to be honest. I've felt like this. Maybe I'm being optimistic that this is a moment that will come and go, and eventually, but it will be interesting if I think about a third book, whether it should be more central.
I don't know. I mean, I think probably you're right. I think it's a discussion at the moment all the time with writers, and I'm not sure there's going to be a massive thirst for people to read lots of pandemic-centric books. So I think probably it's absolutely fine. How have you dealt with it, Stephanie?
My book is primarily, the timelines are primarily July 2019 to January 2020, so it wasn't really, I'm basically not referencing at all.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the book takes place on this island anyway, so it's kind of like its own little civilization, but I don't feel like it really has that much to do with, I mean, I know it seems impossible living through it, like it has to do with everything, but like it just doesn't feel like it feels like I'd be forcing it in to like mention it, so I'm just not doing that.
Well, we will see how it all unfolds. But I would love you both. So I just want to mention all your books before we go. So we have The Burning Men, we have The Recovery of Rose Gold, and we have The Wreckage. And you guys have been amazing. I wish you all the luck in the world. I think the books are brilliant and you guys are brilliant. And I want to say thank you to everybody watching and Lyme Crime. And I really hope that this time next year we will be sitting on a nice beach in Lyme Regis with a cold glass of wine in our hands. And enjoying the festival in person. But thank you all for being amazing guests, and everybody go out and buy their books because they're awesome. Thank you ever so much. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.